On my 30th birthday, I sat in the cramped corner seat of a five-star restaurant while my father raised a glass to toast my younger sister. He called her the family greatest investment and the shining star of the Desmond name. I looked down at my phone, where a calendar notification quietly chirped that it was my birthday. No one heard it. I opened my banking app and saw that I was the only reason they could afford the appetizers sitting on the table. So I smiled, took a sip of tap water, and pressed the button that said, "Withdraw funds." I am Jasmine, 30 years old and a senior actuary. If you have ever been the invisible bank account for your ungrateful family, hit like and subscribe right now. Let me know in the comments if you have ever had to remind people who actually signs the checks, because my family was about to learn a very expensive lesson. The evening started with the humid heat of an Atlanta summer sticking to my skin as I walked into Le Bilboquet. This was the kind of restaurant where the valet parking cost more than my weekly groceries, and the air inside smelled of old money and expensive perfume. My mother Loretta had texted me the time and location 3 days ago, but had not mentioned why we were meeting. I had foolishly allowed myself to hope. 30 was a milestone. Maybe they had remembered. Maybe for once the Desmond family was going to celebrate the daughter who actually kept the lights on. I spotted them at a prime center table under the soft glow of the chandeliers. My mother was already fussing with the lighting, using the flashlight on her phone to illuminate my sister Bianca's face. Bianca was 26 and lived her entire life through a camera lens. She was posing with a glass of champagne, tilting her head just so to catch the light. My father Desmond sat next to her, beaming with pride, while Julian, my brother-in-law, sat opposite them, looking bored and checking his watch. I walked up to the table and for a moment no one noticed me. "Hello, everyone," I said, trying to keep my voice cheerful. My mother glanced up but did not stop adjusting the angle of her phone. "Oh, Jasmine, you are finally here. You are late. We almost ordered without you." I was 5 minutes early, but I swallowed the correction. I looked for a chair. There were only 4 places set. The waiter, seeing the awkwardness, hurriedly dragged a heavy wooden chair from a nearby table and squeezed it onto the corner between Julian and my father. I was practically sitting in the aisle. Julian looked me up and down. I was wearing my work clothes, a gray pencil skirt, and a simple blouse because I had come straight from the office. Julian, on the other hand, was wearing a linen suit that cost more than my first car. "Here comes the calculator," Julian sneered. "Still dressing like a librarian, I see. Do they not let you have fun at that insurance company of yours?" "I work in risk assessment, Julian," I said quietly as I squeezed into my makeshift seat. "And it is an actuarial firm, not just an insurance company." Julian rolled his eyes and turned back to the waiter. "We will take the Chateau Margaux, the vintage bottle, and keep the appetizers coming." I stiffened. That bottle was $500. I looked at my father, expecting him to intervene. We were supposed to be on a budget. I had told them last month that the trust fund dividends were fluctuating, but my father just nodded along, tapping his fingers on the white tablecloth. "Let the boy order," Desmond said. "We are celebrating tonight after all." My heart did a little flutter. Celebrating. They had remembered. I placed my napkin on my lap and waited for the happy birthday wishes. I waited for a card, or maybe a small cupcake. The waiter poured the dark red wine into 4 glasses. He hesitated at mine. Julian waved his hand dismissively. "She will stick to water. Jasmine needs a clear head to count pennies later, right, Jazz?" The table erupted in laughter. My mother laughed the loudest, a tinkling artificial sound she reserved for social gatherings. "Oh, Julian, you are terrible," my mother said, wiping a tear from her eye. "But really, Jasmine, you could afford to loosen up. You are always so serious. Look at your sister, she is glowing." I looked at Bianca. She was indeed glowing, but mostly from the highlighter on her cheekbones and the 3 glasses of champagne she had already consumed. She gave me a pitying smile. "Thanks for coming, Jasmine," Bianca said. "I know you hate leaving your apartment." "I do not hate leaving my apartment," I said. "I just work long hours. That is what happens when you chase a salary instead of a dream, Julian said, swirling his wine. You became a slave to the grind. Look at me. I am my own boss. I make my own hours. Julian called himself a tech entrepreneur. In reality, he had a website that had not been updated in 2 years, and a business plan that consisted of asking my father for loans that never got repaid. Loans that technically came from me. The appetizers arrived a tower of seafood that looked excessive for 5 people. I picked at a shrimp, feeling the knot in my stomach tighten. Why was I here? Why did I subject myself to this every time? Because they were family. Because somewhere deep down inside, the little girl who just wanted her parents to look at her was still waiting for her turn. Attention everyone, my father announced, tapping his fork against his wineglass. The sharp sound cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant. I sat up straighter. This was it. I want to make a toast. My father began standing up. His voice boomed slightly, causing a few nearby tables to turn and look. My father loved an audience. To my beautiful wife Loretta for organizing this wonderful evening, and to our family. But most importantly, tonight, we raise a glass to the jewel of the Desmond line. I held my breath. To Bianca, my father shouted. The air left my lungs. To Bianca, continued my father, oblivious to my frozen expression. For being the only one who truly makes us proud. She has just been accepted into the prestigious Roman Fashion Institute summer program. And to celebrate Julian. And we have decided to send her and Julian to Rome for 2 weeks to experience the culture and inspiration she needs. Applause broke out from the table. My mother clapped her hands together in delight. Bianca squealed and kissed Julian on the cheek. Rome, I whispered. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. My father sat down looking pleased with himself. It is a big investment, but she is worth it. She is going to be a star. We booked the flights this morning. First class, obviously. We want her to arrive rested. I looked around the table. They were all beaming, clinking their expensive glasses. No one looked at me. No one saw the woman who had just turned 30, sitting in the aisle seat, drinking tap water. That is amazing, Dad, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling of my hands. And how are we paying for this? The mood at the table soured instantly. My mother let out a dramatic sigh. Always about the money with you, Jasmine, my mother snapped. Can we not just enjoy the moment? I am just asking, I said. The trust fund distribution is not until next month, and the property taxes on the house are due next week. Julian slammed his wineglass down. God, you are such a buzzkill. Do you think we are stupid? Your father handles the finances. He said there is money in the account. Why do you always have to act like the auditor of joy? My father cleared his throat, avoiding my eyes. I dipped into the emergency reserves, Jasmine. It is an investment in your sister's future. You would understand if you had any vision. Emergency reserves. There were no emergency reserves. There was only the savings account I managed. The account I deposited 60% of my salary into every month under the guise of dividends from a grandfather trust that had actually gone bankrupt 5 years ago. They thought they were living off old money. They were living off my sweat and my overtime and my skipped vacations. I looked at Bianca. She was not even listening. She was busy posting a story on Instagram. Her thumb flew across the screen, captioning a photo of the wine. Rome, here we come. Blessed. And what about my birthday, I asked. The words slipped out before I could stop them. The table went quiet. Bianca looked up from her phone. Is that today, she asked. My mother frowned. I thought that was next week. It is today, I said. Today. I am 30. Oh, my mother said, waving her hand. Well, happy birthday, dear. But honestly, 30 is not really a celebration, is it? It is more of a mourning period for your youth. We will get you a cake next time we see you. Julian snickered. Yeah, 30. Officially an old maid. Better hurry up and find a husband, Jazz, or you will be dying alone with your cats and your calculator. I do not have cats, I said. Whatever Julian said. Look, let us not ruin Bianca night with your pity party. This is a big deal for her. Rome is going to change everything. Yes, it is, I thought. It really is. I sat there for the rest of the meal in silence. I watched them eat the lobster and the steak. I watched them order another bottle of wine. I watched my father slip the waiter $100 bill for a tip to ensure we got the best service. I watched them laugh and plan their itinerary. They talked about the Spanish Steps and the Vatican and the shopping on Via Condotti. They talked about how Bianca was going to network with Italian designers. They never asked me how my day was. They never asked me about my promotion to senior actuary, which I had gotten 2 days ago. They never asked me if I was happy. I was invisible. I was a utility. I was the electricity that powered their lives, silently humming in the background, noticed only when the power went out. And the power was about to go out. As the dinner wound down, the waiter brought the bill. It arrived in a sleek black leather folder. He placed it in the center of the table. Usually my father would make a show of reaching for it. He would pull out his gold card, the one I paid off every month, and hand it over with a flourish. But tonight he was busy showing Bianca photos of the hotel they had booked. Julian saw the folder. He reached out and picked it up. For a second, I thought he was going to offer to pay. He had been bragging all night about his startup and how much potential it had. But Julian did not open the folder. Instead, he looked at me with a smirk that made my skin crawl. He slid the black leather folder across the white tablecloth. It stopped right in front of my water glass. "You get this right," Jazz Julian said, his voice loud enough for the tables around us to hear. "Since you are single and do not have expenses like we do, consider it your contribution to the trip, a little birthday gift from you to your sister." My mother nodded in agreement. "That is a lovely idea, Julian." "Jasmine, you really should. It is the least you can do since you are not coming with us. We need to save our cash for the exchange rate." I looked at the folder. I looked at Julian arrogance. I looked at my parents' entitlement. I looked at Bianca indifference. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud snap. It was the quiet click of a lock turning. It was the sound of a heavy door closing forever. I picked up the folder. I opened it. The total was $1,200. "Sure," I said softly. "I will take care of it." I pulled out my phone. But I did not open my wallet app to pay the bill. I opened my banking app. I navigated to the shared family trust account. The account linked to the card my father had in his pocket. The account linked to the card Julian was currently using to book their limousine to the airport. I saw the balance. It was healthy. It was my money. I looked at Julian one last time. "Enjoy Rome," I said. Then under the table, where they could not see, I selected the option for an immediate internal transfer. I typed in the full amount of the available balance. I moved every single cent to my private high-yield savings account in Switzerland. Then I pressed withdraw. The screen loaded for a second. Then a green checkmark appeared. Transaction successful. Current balance $0.00. I looked up at them and smiled. A real, genuine smile. I stood up and dropped the unpaid bill back onto the table right in front of my father. "Actually," I said, "I think I forgot my wallet. You guys handle this. I have a birthday to celebrate." And before they could say a word, I turned around and walked out of Le Bilboquet, leaving them with a $1,200 bill and a credit card that was about to be declined. The heavy wooden door of Le Bilboquet closed behind me, muffling the sound of my family laughter. The humid Atlanta night air hit my face, but for the first time in years, I did not feel suffocated. I felt clarity. I walked past the line of valet attendants, who were busy retrieving Bentleys and Mercedes SUVs for the Buckhead elite. I kept walking down the block to the public parking garage where I kept my car. My family mocked me for driving a 2015 Toyota Camry with a dent in the rear bumper. Julian called it the embarrassing mobile. My mother refused to ride in it, claiming the cloth seats ruined her dresses. They saw a symbol of failure. I saw a disguise. That car was the perfect camouflage for a woman who held the strings to their entire existence. I slid into the driver's seat and tossed the black leather billfolder onto the passenger seat. The engine sputtered to life with a familiar rattle. I navigated through the traffic, leaving the upscale restaurant district behind. But instead of heading toward the modest apartment complex on the outskirts of the city where my parents thought I lived, I turned onto Peachtree Road. I drove toward the Sovereign, the towering glass skyscraper that defined the city skyline. I pulled up to the private residence entrance. The security guard, a large man named Marcus, who had been working there for 10 years, stepped out of the booth. He did not look at the dented bumper. He looked at me. "Good evening, Ms. Desmond," Marcus said with a warm smile, opening the gate before I even swiped my keycard. "Happy birthday!" "Thank you, Marcus," I said, rolling down the window. "How did you know? You told me last week you were dreading the big 3-0. He chuckled. "I hope the dinner was pleasant." "It was enlightening," I replied. I parked the Toyota in my reserved spot, next to a Lamborghini and a vintage Porsche. I took the private elevator directly to the penthouse floor. As the doors slid open, the silence of my sanctuary welcomed me. My apartment was nothing like the cluttered, ostentatious style my mother loved. It was cool minimalism, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire glittering city of Atlanta, and specifically the darkness. I kicked off my heels and walked barefoot across the heated marble floors to my office. This room was the nerve center of my life. 3 wide curved monitors sat atop a glass desk. I sat down and placed my finger on the biometric scanner. The screens hummed to life, bathing the room in a soft blue glow. I opened a secure folder labeled Project Phoenix. It was a fitting name. 5 years ago, my father Desmond had burned our family legacy to the ground. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and let the memory wash over me. It was a rainy Tuesday. My father had called me into his study, his face pale, his hands shaking. He had gambled on a risky real estate development in Florida and lost everything. The bank was initiating foreclosure on the family estate. He was $4 million in debt. He was crying not because we were going to be homeless, but because his friends at the country club would find out. "Please, Jasmine," he had begged me. "You are good with numbers. Fix this. Do not let them take my dignity." He did not know I had already made a fortune. I had developed a proprietary risk assessment algorithm that a major fintech company had licensed for millions. I was 25 years old and sitting on 8 figures of liquid cash. So I fixed it. But I did not give him the money. I knew him too well. If I had given him a check, he would have blown it on another bad investment within a year. Instead, I created a shell company. I bought his debt from the bank for pennies on the dollar. Then I created the Desmond Family Trust. I told my parents that I had found a loophole in grandfather's old will that released some emergency funds. They were so desperate to believe in their own superiority that they did not question it. They believed the lie because it suited their narrative. They were the Desmonds. Of course, there was old money. They signed the papers without reading them. If they had, they would have seen that the trustee holding absolute power of attorney was not a lawyer or a bank. It was me, Jasmine Desmond. For 5 years, I had paid their mortgage, their country club dues, and their credit card bills. I gave them an allowance that allowed them to maintain the illusion of wealth. And in return, they treated me like the help. I looked at the center monitor. It displayed a real-time visualization of the family cash flow. I saw the transaction from the restaurant pending on the American Express Black Card. $1,200. Technically, that card had my name on the internal account, but the physical card was embossed with Julian's name. I had authorized it as a supplementary card for business expenses only when he married Bianca. He had claimed he needed it for networking to build his startup. I clicked on the transaction history for Julian card. It was a sea of red flags. Bottle service at Gold Room. $3,000. Luxury car rental. $2,000. Watches. Suits. 5-star dinners. He was bleeding the trust dry, and my parents were cheering him on, calling him a visionary. Suddenly, a notification chime pierced the quiet room. A bright red alert box popped up on the right screen. High-risk transaction detected. I leaned closer. The timestamp was 2 minutes ago. Merchant Royal Ace Online Casino. Amount $5,000. Status pending approval. My finger hovered over the deny button. Julian was gambling. He was probably sitting in the back of the limousine right now on his phone trying to double his money before the trip to Rome. He thought the well was bottomless. He had no idea that I was the one watching the water level drop. I thought about declining the charge. It would save me $5,000. It would cause a scene in the car. He would panic. But then I remembered the way he had looked at me in the restaurant, the way he had thrown the bill at me like I was a servant, the way he called me a slave to the grind. I pulled my hand back. No, not yet. If I stopped him now, he could claim it was a mistake. He could spin a lie. He could say his card was hacked. I needed him to dig the hole deeper. I needed him to be so confident, so arrogant, that he would make a mistake he could not talk his way out of. I needed him to be stranded in a foreign country with no lifeline. I moved the cursor to the approve button. Go ahead, Julian, I whispered to the empty room. Bet it all. I clicked approve. The transaction cleared. The alert vanished. On the screen next to the financial data, I pulled up the itinerary for their trip to Rome. First-class flights on Delta. The penthouse suite at the Waldorf Astoria Cavalieri. Private tours of the Vatican. Total estimated cost for the 2-week trip was $40,000. I opened the trust management settings. I navigated to the liquidity control panel. Currently, the settings were on auto refill. Whenever the checking account dipped below $10,000, the system would automatically transfer funds from my high-yield savings to cover it. That was how they lived without ever facing a declined card. I clicked on the drop-down menu. I selected Manual Override. Then I checked the box that said Suspend All Automatic Transfers. A warning message appeared on the screen. Warning. This action will result in immediate payment failures once current funds are exhausted. Do you wish to proceed? I looked at the photo my mother had just posted on Facebook. It was a selfie of the 4 of them in the back of the limo. They were holding glasses of champagne. The caption read, "Off to Rome with the successful part of the family." So blessed. I looked at my own reflection in the dark glass of the window. I saw a woman who was done being the safety net for people who pushed her off the ledge. I clicked, yes. The system updated. The safety net was gone. Now all I had to do was wait. They had enough cash in the account to get to Italy. They had enough to check in. They might even have enough for their first dinner. But after that, the well would run dry. And when they reached for the bucket, they would find only dust. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The city lights twinkled below me like millions of diamonds. I was 30 years old. I was alone in a penthouse. And for the first time in my life, I was completely in control. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from Bianca. "Hey sis, hope you are not too mad about the bill. Julian says you can write it off as a charitable donation since you are helping the needy Lowell." Just kidding. Do not forget to water mom plants while we are gone. Keys are under the mat. I picked up the phone. I did not reply. I deleted the thread. Then I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of vintage wine far better than the one they were drinking in the limo. Let the games begin. 3 days passed between the night I set the trap and the night of the dinner. 3 days where I sat in the eye of the storm while my family whirled around me in a chaotic frenzy of packing and preparation. I watched the data streams on my monitors. I watched Julian drain another $2,000 for designer luggage. I watched my mother book a private car service to the airport. They were spending money like water, and I was the reservoir. I was sitting in my office at the actuarial firm, reviewing a risk portfolio for a multinational shipping company, when my phone buzzed. It was Bianca. I usually let it go to voicemail during work hours, but she called a second time immediately, then a third. I sighed and picked up. "This is Jasmine. I have 5 minutes. You need to get to the dry cleaners on 4th Street right now," Bianca screamed into the phone without a hello. "They are saying they close at 4 today, and my silk dresses for Rome are in there. If I do not get them, I will literally have nothing to wear for the Vatican tour. I looked at the clock on my computer screen. It was 2:30 in the afternoon. My team was waiting for me in the conference room for a quarterly review. I am at work, Bianca, I said, keeping my voice low. I cannot just leave. Call Mom. Or better yet, go get them yourself. You do not have a job. How dare you? Bianca shrieked. I am busy packing. I have a facial appointment at 3. You are so selfish, Jasmine. It is on your way home. Just leave early. No one cares about your boring calculator job anyway. I hung up. I did not say goodbye. I just pressed the red button and put the phone face down. 10 minutes later, the phone vibrated again. This time it was my mother, Loretta. I stepped out of the conference room into the hallway. The glass walls of the office overlooked the busy Atlanta traffic, but I felt trapped. Hello, Mother. Jasmine. Why are you trying to ruin your sister trip? My mother's voice was ice cold. She is in tears. Her eyes are going to be puffy for her facial. I am working, Mother, I said, trying to keep the tremble out of my voice. I run a department. I cannot leave to pick up laundry. It is always about you, isn't it? Loretta snapped. You have always been jealous of her. Ever since you were little, you could not stand it when Bianca got attention. You are trying to sabotage her because she is going to Rome with a handsome husband and you are stuck here alone. Why can you not sacrifice a little bit for her happiness? Just this once. Sacrifice a little bit. The words echoed in my head. I had sacrificed my 20s. I had sacrificed my credit score initially until I fixed it. I had sacrificed my dreams of traveling so I could fund their lifestyle. I am not picking up the dresses, I said firmly. And I have to go. My boss is waiting. I hung up on my mother for the first time in my life. My hands were shaking as I walked back into the meeting, but I forced myself to focus on the spreadsheets. Numbers were safe. Numbers did not lie. Numbers did not call you jealous when you were simply exhausted. The next day, the harassment shifted from errands to assets. Julian sent me a text message at noon. It was a link to a Zillow listing for a 5-bedroom house in Buckhead. The asking price was $1.5 million. Below the link he wrote, "Check this out. Bianca loves the kitchen. I am going to put an offer in when we get back from Rome. I need you to sign as a guarantor." I stared at the screen. A guarantor. He wanted me to co-sign. I typed back, "Why do you need me? You said your startup is booming." Julian replied instantly, "It is booming, Jazz, but most of my capital is tied up in equity right now. Banks are so old school they want liquid proof. Since you have that steady W-2 income, having you on the mortgage will just speed up the paperwork. Consider it an investment. When I sell my company, I will cut you a check for your trouble." I almost laughed out loud in the middle of my silent office. He wanted me to leverage my credit to buy a house I would never be allowed to visit. He wanted me to take on the risk while he played the big-shot homeowner. I did not reply. He texted again an hour later. "Do not be difficult, Jasmine. Mom and Dad already said it is a great idea. They said you would be happy to help the family build wealth. We are a team, remember. A team. A team where one person pulls the wagon and the other 4 ride in the back, whipping her to go faster." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The audacity was breathtaking. They truly believed I existed solely to facilitate their dreams. They had stripped me of my identity and replaced it with a function. I was not a daughter or a sister. I was a utility. That evening I drove home to my penthouse in the dark. The city was lit up around me, but I felt a profound loneliness. I parked next to the Lamborghini that belonged to a rapper who lived on the floor below me. He had treated me with more respect in the elevator yesterday than my family had in 30 years. I walked into my apartment and threw my bag on the couch. I did not turn on the lights. I just stood there looking out at the skyline. My phone chimed with a calendar notification. I pulled it out of my pocket. The screen glowed in the darkness. Tomorrow, Jasmine, 30th birthday. I stared at the date. 30. It was a milestone. It was supposed to be the start of a new chapter. My finger hovered over the execute button on my trust fund management app. The trap was ready. I could end it now. I could cancel their cards tonight. I could send them a text saying I was done. But a small, foolish part of me hesitated. Maybe they were stressed. Maybe the trip had just overwhelmed them. Maybe tomorrow at the dinner they insisted on having they would surprise me. Maybe there would be a cake. Maybe my mother would hug me and say she was proud of me too. Maybe Julian would actually pay the bill. I decided to give them one last chance. I would go to the dinner at Le Bilboquet. I would sit down. I would wait. If they remembered my birthday, if they showed me even a single ounce of genuine affection or gratitude, I would pause the plan. I would let them go to Rome. I would try to talk to them like adults. But if they forgot, if they treated me like an ATM one more time, then I would burn the bridge while they were standing on it. I swiped the notification away. I went to my closet and picked out my outfit for tomorrow. I chose a simple gray skirt and a blouse. I would dress the part they expected, the boring actuary, the invisible girl. I went to sleep with a heavy heart praying that I was wrong about them. But deep down, as I drifted off, I knew. I knew exactly what was going to happen. And I knew that by this time tomorrow, I would finally be free. The morning of my 30th birthday arrived not with fanfare or balloons, but with a silence so profound it felt heavy. The sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I rolled over in my king-sized bed, reaching instinctively for my phone on the nightstand. My heart gave a small, involuntary flutter. It was a reflex born of decades of conditioning, a childish hope that maybe, just maybe, this year would be different. I unlocked the screen. The time was 7:30 in the morning. No missed calls, no text messages, no emails with subject lines like happy birthday or thinking of you. Just a notification from my dentist reminding me of a cleaning next Tuesday, and a spam email about extending my car warranty. I sat up and swung my legs over the edge of the bed, planting my feet on the cold marble floor. I walked to the kitchen and made coffee, the mechanical whir and drip of the machine the only sound in the vast apartment. I took my cup and stood by the window looking out at the Atlanta skyline. The city was waking up, cars crawling along the highway like ants. Everyone down there had somewhere to go, someone to see. I checked my phone again. Still nothing. Then the Facebook icon illuminated with a little red dot. A tag. My stomach tightened. I tapped the icon. It was a post from my mother, Loretta. The timestamp showed it was posted 2 hours ago. The photo was taken at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, inside the Delta Sky Club. My sister Bianca and her husband Julian were seated in plush leather armchairs, holding crystal flutes of champagne. They were beaming, their smiles wide and triumphant. Bianca was wearing a white designer tracksuit that I knew cost more than my first car. Julian looked smug, his arm draped possessively over the back of Bianca's chair. But it was the caption that sucked the air out of my lungs. My mother had written, "Saying goodbye to our two angels as they head to Rome to conquer the world. So incredibly proud of the life they are building. Bianca, you are truly the only one who makes the Desmond name shine. We love you both more than words can say. Bon voyage." The only one. I read the words again. The only one who makes the Desmond name shine. It wasn't just a compliment to Bianca. It was an erasure of me. It was a public declaration that my existence, my hard work, my sacrifices meant absolutely nothing to them. I was the ghost in the machine, the invisible engine that kept their luxury lifestyle running while they praised the paint job. I zoomed in on the photo, looking for details, looking for flaws, looking for anything to distract me from the pain in my chest. That was when I saw it. On Julian's left wrist, gleaming under the airport lounge lights, was a watch. It was a vintage gold Rolex Submariner with a distinct blue dial. My hands started to tremble. I knew that watch. I knew every scratch on the bezel, every link in the band. I had bought that watch for my father 6 months ago for his 60th birthday. It had cost me $12,000. I had spent months tracking it down because he had mentioned once years ago that it was his dream watch. When I gave it to him, he had teared up. He had hugged me and said he would treasure it forever, that it was a family heirloom to be passed down. And now it was on the wrist of my brother-in-law. My father had given it away. He had taken the most personal, valuable gift I had ever given him and handed it to the man who openly mocked me, the man who called me a calculator, the man who was currently drinking champagne on my dime. I stared at the pixels on the screen until they blurred. I waited for the tears. I waited for the familiar sting of rejection, the sobbing that usually accompanied these realizations. But the tears did not come. Instead, a cold calm washed over me. It started at my fingertips and spread through my veins, chilling my blood. It was the absolute zero of emotional detachment. I realized then that I was not sad. I was done. I was done buying their love. I was done paying for their respect. I was done being the safety net for a family of trapeze artists who spit on me from the high wire. I put my coffee cup down on the counter. The ceramic made a sharp clink against the granite. I picked up my phone again. I did not close Facebook. I did not comment on the photo. I did not like it. I swiped up and opened my banking application. The Face ID scanned my features, recognizing the woman my family refused to see. The dashboard loaded, displaying the current balance of the Desmond Family Trust, $3,500,000.42. It was a beautiful number, a powerful number, and it was all mine. I navigated to the admin panel. I selected the tab labeled Linked Cards and Assets. I saw the list: Desmond Platinum Visa, Loretta Amex Gold, Julian Corporate Black Card, Bianca Supplementary Card. Next to each name was a little toggle switch currently set to green for active. I looked at the photo of Julian one last time. I looked at the watch on his wrist. "Happy birthday to me," I whispered to the empty room. My thumb hovered over the master switch at the top of the screen, the one labeled Freeze All Assets. I did not hesitate. I did not flinch. I pressed down. The screen brought up a confirmation dialog box. "Are you sure you want to freeze all linked accounts? This will result in immediate decline of all pending and future transactions." I tapped yes. A loading circle spun for a second. Then the toggle switches all flipped to gray. The status next to each name changed from active to frozen. See Administrator. I wasn't finished. I went to the transfer section. I selected the entire balance of the trust account. Every single penny. Destination account Jasmine Private Holdings, Swiss Bancorp. Transfer, confirm. Success. The balance on the Desmond Family Trust screen dropped to zero. I set the phone down on the counter. I took a deep breath, and for the first time that morning the air felt sweet. It felt like freedom. Somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, in a business-class cabin, at 30,000 feet, Julian was probably ordering another bottle of Dom Perignon. He was probably reaching for that black card, expecting it to work just like it always had. He had no idea that the ground had just disappeared beneath him. I walked back to my bedroom and began to dress. Not for work. Today was my birthday. I was going to go to the spa. I was going to get a massage. I was going to buy myself a cake. And I was going to enjoy every single second of silence from my phone, because I knew that when the storm hit, it was going to be deafening. But for now, in the eye of the hurricane, I was at peace. The screen on my phone pulsed with a soft green light indicating the first command had executed successfully. The $3.5 million that had insulated my family from reality for 5 years was now traveling through the digital ether. It was leaving the local trust account in Atlanta, bouncing through a secure server in New York, and settling quietly into my private holding account in Zurich. I watched the progress bar inch toward 100%. When it finished, the balance on the screen blinked once and settled at 0.00. It was strange how little noise a catastrophe made. There was no explosion, no siren, just a silent rearrangement of pixels. But I knew the shockwave was already spreading. I was not done yet. Taking the money was just the foundation. Now I had to dismantle the house they had built on top of it. I navigated to the credit management tab. This was where I controlled the limits on the supplementary cards. My mother card with her $5,000 monthly allowance for garden parties. Bianca card, which seemed to exist solely for buying shoes she wore once. And Julian card, the black card he flashed around town like a badge of honor. I tapped on Julian name. The current limit was set to $50,000 a month. I tapped the edit icon. I backspaced over the 5 and the 4 zeros. I typed in a single 0. I did the same for Bianca. 0. And for my mother. 0. And for my father. 0. The system prompted me for a reason code. I scrolled down the list of options. Lost or stolen. Fraud. Administrative error. None of them felt right. I selected other and typed in a single word in the notes field. Consequences. Next came the assets. I opened the vehicle leasing portal. Julian drove a Range Rover autobiography that cost more than most people earned in 2 years. He told everyone he bought it with his startup bonus. In reality, the lease was held by my shell company, and he was listed merely as an authorized driver. The contract had a very specific clause regarding default. If the primary funding source for the lease was terminated, the owner had the right to initiate immediate recovery. I clicked on the Vehicle Location tab. The GPS tracker showed the car was currently parked in the long-term lot at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. I selected the option marked Initiate Recovery Protocol. A drop-down menu appeared asking for the time frame. I selected Immediate. A tow truck dispatch order was automatically generated. By the time Julian landed in Rome, his beloved car would be sitting in an impound lot in Decatur, and he would have no way to get it back. Finally, I opened the property management app. My parents lived in a 6-bedroom colonial mansion in Buckhead. They strutted around the neighborhood acting like the lords of the manor. But the deed was in my name. The utility bills were in my name. The internet service was in my name. I went to the utilities dashboard. Georgia Power, Atlanta Watershed, Xfinity High-Speed Internet. I selected all 3 accounts. I chose the option for service suspension. The system warned me that reconnecting services would require a substantial deposit and a visit to the office. I confirmed the suspension effective immediately. I imagined the scene at the house. The smart fridge would stop humming, the security system would go dark, the pool pump would silence, the Wi-Fi signal that kept them connected to their precious social media would vanish. The house would become just a cold, dark shell, stripped of the lifeblood I had provided. I placed my phone face down on the marble counter. It was done. The bridge was not just burned, it was disintegrated. I walked into my bathroom. It was a sanctuary of white stone and glass. I ran a bath adding drops of lavender oil and watching the steam rise. I stripped off the clothes that I wore to be the invisible daughter. I stepped into the hot water and let out a long, slow breath. For the first time in 30 years, I did not feel the crushing weight of expectation. I did not worry about whether my mother approved of my hair or if my father was disappointed in my career choice. I did not worry about Bianca needing a bailout or Julian needing an ego boost. I closed my eyes and floated. Later that afternoon, I drove to the most expensive spa in the city. I did not drive my dented Toyota. I took the vintage Porsche 911 that I kept under a tarp in the back of my garage. The engine purred with a deep throaty growl that turned heads as I pulled out of the Sovereign. At the spa, I ordered the full package: deep tissue massage, facial manicure, pedicure. When the receptionist asked if I was celebrating a special occasion, I smiled. Yes, I said. I am celebrating my retirement. Retirement, she asked, looking at my youthful face. You look so young to be retired. Retirement from a toxic job, I clarified. The worst job I ever had. I turned off my phone and left it in the locker. For 4 hours, I was unreachable. I was untouchable. I was just Jasmine. While I lay on a massage table listening to soft flute music and smelling eucalyptus, the world I had set in motion continued to spin. Thousands of miles away, a Delta flight was cruising at 35,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean. In the business class cabin, Julian was likely waking up from a nap. He would stretch, adjusting the sleep mask on his forehead. He would reach for the remote control to turn on the in-flight entertainment system. He would decide to order one last drink before landing, maybe a cognac to settle his nerves. He would plan to buy a round for the couple sitting across the aisle, trying to impress them with stories of his imaginary tech empire. He would pull his phone out of airplane mode as they began their descent, hoping to catch a signal to check his sports bets. The phone would connect to the Italian network, roaming charges applying instantly. And then a series of text messages would flood in. One from the credit card company, one from the bank, one from the car leasing agency. But the first one, the one that would make his blood run cold, would be the automated alert from the main trust account. Transaction declined. Account locked. Contact administrator immediately. I could picture the confusion on his face. He would frown, tapping the screen thinking it was a glitch. He would try to refresh the app. He would turn to Bianca, who was fixing her makeup, and say, "Something is wrong with the bank app, babe." He would not know yet that it wasn't a glitch. He would not know that the administrator he needed to contact was currently getting a hot stone massage and had absolutely no intention of answering the phone. The plane wheels touched down on the tarmac in Rome. The tires screeched against the runway. And as the cabin crew welcomed them to Italy, Julian life as he knew it ended. I rolled over on the massage table and sighed happily. It was the best birthday I had ever had. Rome greeted my sister and her husband, not with the romantic embrace they expected, but with a chaotic, humid blast of heat at Fiumicino Airport. They had breezed through customs, their egos inflated by the first-class flight and the champagne that had flowed freely right up until landing. Julian was already in character, wearing his linen suit and sunglasses indoors, barking orders at the porter to handle their 6 Louis Vuitton suitcases with care. He looked every inch the wealthy American tourist, a role he had played perfectly on my dime for years. They bypassed the regular taxi line. Julian had insisted on a private limousine transfer to the Waldorf Astoria Cavalieri, one of the most expensive hotels in the city. He waved his hand at a driver holding a sign that did not have his name on it, negotiating an exorbitant cash price because he was certain he could just withdraw more money at the hotel. Bianca was busy filming a story for her followers, spinning around to show off the airport exit. Finally, in Rome, she squealed into her phone camera. Life is just so beautiful when you manifest your dreams. The drive to the hotel was their victory lap. They watched the ancient ruins and cypress trees blur past, convincing themselves they were the main characters in a movie. When the car pulled up the winding driveway to the Waldorf, the sheer opulence of the place seemed to validate everything they believed about themselves. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and gold, filled with art, that cost more than most countries' GDP. Julian strode to the reception desk, leaving Bianca to pose by a statue. He slapped his black wallet onto the marble counter with a heavy, confident thud. Checking in under Vance, he announced loudly enough for the people behind him to hear. "The penthouse suite. And have a bottle of your best Prosecco sent up immediately. We need to freshen up before dinner." The receptionist, a polished Italian woman with impeccable posture, typed his name into the system. Her smile was professional and warm. "Welcome, Mr. Vance. May I have your credit card for the deposit and incidentals?" Julian pulled out the black card. The one connected to the trust. The one I had zeroed out while getting a pedicure. He handed it over with a smirk. "Keep it on file," he said. "We will be doing a lot of shopping." The receptionist inserted the card into the chip reader. Julian drummed his fingers on the counter, looking around the lobby, admiring the ceiling. He was already mentally spending money he did not have. The machine beeped. a sharp, dissonant sound that cut through the soft lobby music. The receptionist frowned slightly. She pulled the card out and wiped the chip, then inserted it again. Julian stopped drumming his fingers. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone already sharpening with irritation. "One moment, sir," the receptionist said. Her eyes scanned the screen and her professional smile faltered just a fraction. Beep! The machine rejected it again. The receptionist lowered her voice, leaning in slightly to preserve discretion. "I am afraid this card has been declined, sir. The system is flagging it with a code referring to a report of theft." Theft. Julian laughed, a loud barking sound that drew stares. "That is ridiculous. I am the owner of the card. Try it again. It is probably your Italian internet connection." "Sir, the connection is fine," the receptionist said, her voice cooling. "The issuer has blocked the transaction. Do you have another form of payment?" Julian's face turned a shade of crimson that clashed with his expensive suit. He snatched the card back and pulled out the corporate card. "This was also linked to my accounts." "Use this one," he snapped. "And hurry up. My wife is waiting." The receptionist inserted the second card. Beep. Declined. Julian pulled out a third card, then a fourth. Beep. Beep. By now a line had formed behind him. People were whispering. Bianca, noticing the commotion, stopped posing and walked over, her smile fading. "Babe, what is going on?" she whispered, clutching her designer bag. "Why aren't we going to the room?" "These idiots do not know how to run a credit card machine," Julian hissed loud enough for the manager to step over. He slammed his hand on the counter. "Do you know who I am? I am a VIP guest. I demand you override this immediately." "Mr. Vance," the manager said, stepping in with calm authority, "the cards are reporting as lost or stolen. We cannot accept them. Unless you can produce 10,000 euros in cash for the deposit immediately, we cannot check you in." Julian opened his wallet. He stared into the leather fold. He had exactly 200 euros in cash. The rest he had spent on tips and drinks at the airport, assuming he could just hit an ATM later. 10,000. Bianca gasped. "Julian, just call the bank. Call Jasmine. She must have messed something up." "I am not calling her," Julian shouted, losing all composure. "This is a mistake, sir," the manager said, signaling to two large security guards standing near the entrance. "If you cannot pay, I must ask you to step aside. We have paying guests waiting." The walk of shame from the reception desk to the exit was the longest journey of their lives. The luggage they had been so proud of was now a burden they had to drag themselves because the porters had disappeared. The guests who had looked at them with envy were now looking at them with pity and amusement. Bianca pulled her sunglasses down to cover her eyes, her face burning with humiliation. They stood on the curb outside the Waldorf, surrounded by their Louis Vuitton bags, in the scorching Roman heat. "What do we do?" Bianca sobbed. "We cannot stay on the street, Julian." Julian checked his phone. No service. He had forgotten to buy an international plan, and now, without the auto-renew on the credit card, his provider had cut him off. "We have 200 euros, he muttered, his arrogance deflating like a punctured tire. "We need a taxi, and we need a cheap place to sleep until I can get hold of your useless sister." They did not take a limousine. They took a cramped, smelly taxi with broken air conditioning. The driver took them to a hostel near the train station, a neighborhood known for pickpockets and graffiti. The room smelled of stale smoke and damp plaster. There was no view of the Vatican, only a view of a dumpster in the alleyway. The walls were paper-thin, and they could hear the couple next door arguing in German. Bianca sat on the sagging mattress, still wearing her white designer tracksuit, and burst into hysterical tears. "Call Mom," she screamed. "Fix this, Julian. You said you had money. You said you were a tech mogul. Why are we in a dump?" "I am trying," Julian yelled back, pacing the tiny room. He finally managed to connect to the hostel's spotty Wi-Fi. He made a WhatsApp call to Atlanta. It was morning in Georgia. My father Desmond was sitting at the breakfast table enjoying his coffee, blissfully unaware that the electricity was about to be cut off later that afternoon. When the phone rang, he put it on speaker. "Hello, Julian, my boy. How is the Eternal City?" "Desmond, we are in a nightmare," Julian shouted, his voice cracking. Jasmine cut us off. "The cards are all declined. They kicked us out of the hotel. We are in a hostel, Desmond. A hostel with cockroaches. You need to send cash now. Western Union. Anything." My father's face went pale. "What do you mean declined? That is impossible. I just spoke to the banker last week." "It is!" Jasmine Bianca screamed from the background. "She stole the money, Daddy. She stranded us. I am scared. Please help me." "Hold on, sweetie, hold on," my father said, his chest puffing up with indignation. "I will handle this. That girl has gone too far. I am going to the bank right now. I will transfer 10,000 to you immediately. Do not worry. Daddy is here." My father grabbed his keys and rushed out of the house. He jumped into his Mercedes and sped toward the nearest branch of our family bank. He was furious. He rehearsed the speech he was going to scream at me later. How dare I embarrass the family? How dare I touch the money that he believed was rightfully his? He pulled up to the drive-through ATM. He did not want to wait for a teller. He needed to be the hero instantly. He inserted his platinum debit card into the machine. He typed in his PIN. He selected transfer. The screen processed for a moment. Then a mechanical whirring sound came from the machine. It sounded like gears grinding. A message flashed on the screen in stark green letters. "Card retained. Contact issuer." My father stared at the screen. He pressed the cancel button. He pressed the return card button. Nothing. The machine had swallowed his card. He pounded on the plastic casing of the ATM. "Give it back," he yelled. "That is my card." But the machine remained silent. He sat there in his luxury car in the middle of the affluent suburbs with no cash, no card, and a phone that was blowing up with messages from his weeping daughter in Rome. And for the first time, the terrifying reality began to dawn on him. The safety net was gone, and he was falling. While Julian was sweating in a Roman hostel, my parents were about to experience their own version of a heat wave right in the comfort of the Buckhead mansion they believed they owned. The Georgia summer sun was beating down on the slate roof, and the humidity was rising like a physical weight. Inside the house, the air conditioning had been humming quietly, keeping the temperature at a crisp 68 degrees, just the way my mother liked it. My father Desmond had just returned from the bank, his face red with rage and confusion after the ATM had swallowed his debit card. He stormed into the kitchen, tossing his keys on the marble island. "Loretta," he shouted, "you are not going to believe this. The machine took my card. It must be a system error. I have been calling the concierge line for 20 minutes and no one is picking up." My mother was standing by the oversized smart refrigerator filling a crystal glass with ice. "Well, keep trying, Desmond," she said dismissively. "I need you to transfer money to Bianca. She is hysterical." Apparently there was a mix-up with the hotel reservation. Suddenly, the hum of the refrigerator stopped. The ice dispenser sputtered and died mid-cube. The lights under the cabinets flickered once and went black. The low, ambient music playing from the ceiling speakers cut out into dead silence. My mother frowned, tapping the glass against the dispenser lever. "Desmond, did you hit a switch?" she asked. "The power just went out." My father looked around. The microwave clock was blank. The oven display was dark. He walked to the window and looked at the neighbor house across the manicured lawn. The lights were blazing in the Smiths' living room. The street lamps were on. "It is just us," my father grumbled. "Probably a blown fuse. This house is too big for its own good sometimes. I will go check the breaker box." He went down to the basement, stumbling in the dark because the emergency lights, which I also paid for, had not been serviced in a year. He flipped the main breaker switch off and on. Nothing happened. He came back upstairs, wiping sweat from his forehead. The air in the house was already starting to feel heavy and stagnant. "It is not the breaker," he said. "You better call Georgia Power. Tell them we are priority customers. I do not want to be sweating in my own living room." My mother sighed and pulled out her cell phone. She dialed the customer service number, putting it on speaker so she could continue mixing her drink with warm water. She waited through the automated prompts, tapping her foot impatiently. Finally, a representative answered. "Georgia Power, this is Sarah. How can I help you?" "Yes, this is Mrs. Desmond at 402 Highland Drive," my mother said, her voice dripping with entitlement. "Our power has just been cut. We are up to date on our bills, so I assume this is a mistake on your end. I expect it turned back on immediately." There was the sound of typing on the other end. "One moment, Mrs. Desmond, let me pull up the account," the representative said. My mother rolled her eyes at my father. "Incompetence," she whispered. "Everywhere you look." "Actually, ma'am," the representative came back on the line. "I see here that a disconnect order was processed earlier today." "Disconnect?" my mother screeched. "That is impossible. We did not request a disconnect. We live here." The representative voice remained calm. "The request came from the account holder directly. They requested immediate termination of service and closing of the account." My mother laughed, a harsh, nervous sound. "I am the account holder. My husband is the account holder, and we are standing right here in the dark. I apologize, ma'am, but the name on the account is Ms. Jasmine Desmond. She provided the correct security verification and authorized the shutoff." The phone slipped slightly in my mother's hand. "Jasmine." My father repeated the name like it was a curse word. "Why is Jasmine name on the power bill?" "She must have put it in her name years ago to help with the paperwork," my mother stammered. "But she has no right to turn it off. Turn it back on immediately." "I cannot do that, ma'am," the representative said. "Since the account is closed, you will need to open a new account. That will require a credit check and a deposit of $500 plus a reconnection fee. And the earliest we can send a technician out is Tuesday." Tuesday. My mother screamed. "That is 3 days away. We cannot live without electricity for 3 days. It is 90 degrees outside. I am sorry, ma'am. Those are the rules." My mother hung up the phone, her hands trembling. She looked at my father. "She cut the power, Desmond. Jasmine cut the power." Before my father could explode, the water in the sink stopped running. The stream simply dwindled to a trickle, and then nothing. My father ran to the faucet and twisted the handle back and forth. Dry. He pulled out his phone to call the water company, but the Wi-Fi icon at the top of his screen disappeared. The internet was gone. They stood there in the rapidly heating kitchen, surrounded by the best appliances money could buy, which were now nothing more than expensive metal boxes. "This does not make sense." My father paced the floor. "Why is everything in her name? This is my house. I bought this house 20 years ago. Did you, Desmond?" my mother asked, her voice quiet with fear. "Think back. 5 years ago. The bankruptcy." My father froze. He ran to his study. He began tearing through the drawers of his mahogany desk. He threw tax returns and golf scorecards onto the floor. He opened the wall safe, spinning the dial with frantic fingers. He pulled out a thick, dusty folder labeled Legal 2019. He opened it. His eyes scanned the documents he had signed so eagerly back then, desperate to save his reputation. Deed of transfer, grantor Desmond Family Holdings. Grantee the Desmond Trust. Trustee Jasmine Desmond. He turned the page. Property management agreement. Owner Jasmine Desmond. Occupant Desmond and Loretta Desmond. Terms at will, tenancy subject to the discretion of the owner. He dropped the papers on the desk. He had thought he was just hiding assets. He thought he was being clever, using his quiet, obedient daughter as a placeholder. He never once read the fine print that gave the placeholder absolute power. "She owns it," he whispered. "She owns everything. The house, the cars, the furniture. We are just guests." My mother walked into the study, fanning herself with a magazine. Guests who just got evicted, she said. We have to find her. We have to make her fix this. She is having a tantrum because we forgot her birthday. That is all. We will go there. We will yell at her and she will fold like she always does. Where does she live? My father asked, grabbing his car keys. My mother paused. She blinked. Well, she lives in that apartment complex, the one near the highway. The ugly brick one. Which one? My father asked. The one we dropped her off at that one time, my mother said. Come on, I know the way. They ran out to the garage. My father got into his Mercedes, but the engine would not start. The battery was dead, or perhaps it was another remote kill switch. He cursed, and they ran to my mother's car, a smaller sedan, that thankfully roared to life. They drove frantically through the city traffic, my father running red lights. They were sweating profusely now, their expensive clothes sticking to their skin. The air conditioning in the car was blasting, but it could not cool down their panic. They pulled up to the rundown apartment complex where I had lived 3 years ago. It was a modest place, working class clean, but far below their standards. This is it, my mother said, pointing to Building C. Apartment 204. They marched up the stairs, banging on the door. Jasmine. Open up, my father shouted, pounding his fist against the wood. Open up right now. This isn't funny. You are in big trouble, young lady. The door opened. But it was not me standing there. It was a large man with a beard holding a crying baby. He looked tired and annoyed. Can I help you? He asked. Where is Jasmine? My father demanded, trying to look past him. Tell her to come out. Who? The man asked. Jasmine Desmond. She lives here. Lady. Nobody named Jasmine lives here, the man said. Me and my wife have lived here for 2 years. My mother stepped forward, but this is her address. We have mailed. She stopped. She realized they had never mailed me anything. Not a birthday card, not a Christmas card. They only sent texts when they wanted something. She moved out 2 years ago, the man said, shifting the baby to his other hip. The landlord said the previous tenant bought a place downtown. Now get off my porch before I call the cops. He slammed the door in their faces. My parents stood on the dirty welcome mat, staring at the peeling paint on the door. The noise of the highway roared in the distance. They turned to each other. You do not know where she lives? My father said accusingly. Me, my mother shot back. You are her father. You do not know where she lives. They realized in that moment, standing in the heat, that they did not know me at all. They did not know my address. They did not know my friends. They did not know where I worked, only that it was some insurance place. They pulled out their phones to call me again. My father dialed my number. The call did not go through. It did not even ring. The number you have dialed is not accepting calls from this number. He tried from my mother's phone. Same message. They were blocked. They were homeless in their own home. They were broke. And the only person who could save them had just ghosted them completely. My father slumped against the railing of the apartment complex. He looked at his phone, which had 15% battery left. She planned this, he whispered. She planned this whole thing. And for the first time in his life, he felt the true weight of the person he had underestimated. He wasn't dealing with his daughter anymore. He was dealing with his landlord, his banker, and his judge. And the verdict had just been delivered. While my parents were frantically driving around Atlanta, trying to find a daughter they had never bothered to know, Bianca and Julian were discovering that Rock Bottom had a basement. The Roman sun was unforgiving, and the air conditioning in their hostel had broken down completely, leaving their tiny rooms smelling of mildew and desperation. It had been 24 hours since their credit cards were declined, and the reality of their situation was setting in with terrifying clarity. They were stranded in a foreign country with no money, no return tickets, and no allies. The hunger was the first thing to break the facade. Julian, the man who only drank sparkling water and ate organic beef, was pacing the cramped room like a caged animal. His stomach growled loud enough to be heard over the traffic noise from the street below. He turned his eyes toward Bianca, who was sitting on the edge of the sagging bed clutching her orange Hermes Birkin bag like a life raft. It was the bag I had bought her for Christmas 2 years ago, a symbol of the status she believed was her birthright. "We need money!" Julian snapped, his voice devoid of the fake charm he usually wore. "We need to eat, and I need a drink." Bianca looked up, her mascara smudged around her eyes. "Daddy said he was sending money. We just have to wait." "Your daddy is useless," Julian spat. "He cannot even figure out how to use an ATM. We are not waiting. We are liquidating." He pointed a manicured finger at the orange bag in her lap. "That bag is worth $10,000, Julian said. "Get up. We are going to find a pawn shop." Bianca gasped, clutching the leather tighter. "No, Julian, not my Birkin. It is my favorite. Jasmine gave this to me." "I do not care who gave it to you," Julian yelled, lunging forward and grabbing the handle. "Give it to me. Do you want to starve? Do you want to sleep on the street tonight because the hostel manager is already asking for payment for the next night?" He ripped the bag from her hands. Bianca cried out, but she was too weak and too shocked to fight back. She followed him out of the room, trailing behind him like a ghost, as he marched through the gritty streets near the Termini station, searching for a sign that said Compro Oro or pawn shop. They found a small, dingy shop with bars on the windows. The owner, a man with grease-stained fingers, looked at the pristine luxury bag and then at the desperate, sweating American couple. He knew he had the upper hand. He offered them €500. "It is worth 10,000, Julian argued, slamming his fist on the counter. "Do you know what this is? Take it or leave it," the man said in broken English, shrugging his shoulders. Julian took it. He snatched the cash and shoved it into his pocket without looking at Bianca, who was weeping silently in the corner. He did not offer her a tissue. He did not hug her. He just walked out the door and headed straight for the nearest trattoria. They sat at a table with a checkered tablecloth. Julian ordered a large plate of carbonara, a steak, and a bottle of red wine. He ate voraciously, shoving forkfuls of pasta into his mouth, grease coating his lips. Bianca sat across from him, her stomach cramping with hunger. She reached for the bread basket. Julian slapped her hand away. "Do not fill up on bread," he said with his mouth full. "We need to ration this money. Are you going to order something for me?" Bianca asked, her voice trembling. "I am eating for stress relief," Julian said, pouring himself another glass of wine. "You can have the crusts of my pizza later. Besides, you have been gaining weight anyway. Consider this a detox." Bianca stared at him. For the first time, the golden haze of infatuation began to clear. She looked at the man she had married, the man she thought was a wealthy tech mogul, and she saw a parasite. She saw a man who was eating steak while his wife starved, a man who had sold her prized possession and kept the change. "Why are you doing this?" Bianca whispered. "You said you had millions in equity. You said your startup was about to go public. Why do we need to sell my bag if you are so rich?" Julian laughed, a harsh, cruel sound that made the other diners look over. "Rich," he sneered, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "I am broke, Bianca. I have been broke since the day I met you. My startup is a website I paid a teenager $50 to build. I have zero revenue, zero investors." Bianca felt the room spin. "What are you talking about?" "But the cars, the dinners, the trips. All paid for by your family?" Julian said, leaning across the table, his eyes cold and dead. "Or rather, paid for by your sister. I thought I hit the jackpot when I married you. I thought the Desmond family was loaded. I thought I could just ride the wave of old money for the rest of my life." He took a swig of wine directly from the bottle. "But it turns out your parents are frauds too," he continued. "They are broke. Your dad is a failure who lost everything 5 years ago. I found the bankruptcy papers in his office months ago. I stayed because I realized Jasmine was the golden goose. That quiet little mouse was funding the whole operation. I figured as long as I kept you happy and your parents happy, she would keep signing the checks." He slammed the bottle down. "But now the goose has stopped laying eggs, and I am stuck here with you. A spoiled, useless princess who has no skills, no money, and apparently no brain." Tears streamed down Bianca's face, hot and stinging. "You never loved me," she choked out. "Love is a luxury," Julian scoffed. "I loved the lifestyle. I loved the access. But you are just a high-maintenance accessory. And right now you are an accessory I cannot afford." He finished the steak, leaving nothing but the gristle. He threw a few euros on the table, not enough for a tip, and stood up. "Come on," he ordered. "We are going back to the room. Do not expect me to carry your bags tomorrow when they kick us out." Bianca followed him back to the hostel, numb with shock. The man she adored, the man she had bragged about to all her friends, was a monster. He had used her, he had isolated her, and now he was starving her. That night Julian passed out on the bed, snoring loudly, the smell of cheap wine filling the small room. Bianca lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her stomach hurt, but her heart hurt more. She felt stripped bare. All her life she had been the golden child, protected from reality, told she was special. Now she realized she was just currency. She needed help. She needed the one person who had always fixed everything. She waited until Julian was in a deep sleep. Then she slipped out of bed, moving silently in the dark. She grabbed her phone, which was useless without service, and crept out into the hallway. She went down to the reception desk. The night clerk was asleep in his chair. "Excuse me," she whispered, tapping on the glass. "Please, I need to make a call. It is an emergency." "Oh." The clerk woke up groggy and annoyed. "No phones," he grunted. "Please," Bianca begged, taking off her diamond earrings, the only jewelry Julian hadn't forced her to sell yet. "Please, I will give you these. I just need to make one call to America." The clerk looked at the diamonds. He nodded and pushed an old landline phone across the counter. Bianca's hands shook as she dialed the number. She knew it by heart. It was the number she called when she needed money, when she needed a ride, when she needed someone to clean up her mess. The phone rang. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. "Please pick up," Bianca prayed. "Please pick up, Jazz." On the 4th ring, the line clicked open. "Hello?" The voice was calm, cool, and steady. It was the voice of safety. "Jasmine," Bianca sobbed, clutching the receiver with both hands. "Jasmine, it is me. Oh God, Jasmine, you have to help us." She waited for Jasmine to ask what was wrong. She waited for the concern. There was only silence on the other end. "Jasmine, are you there?" Bianca cried louder. "It is Julian. He is crazy. He sold my bag. He told me he never loved me. He admitted everything. He said he only married me for the money. We are in a hostel. We have no food. He ate a steak in front of me and let me starve. I am so scared, Jasmine. Please. I am sorry. I am so sorry for everything. Just buy us tickets home. I will do anything." She poured her heart out, confessing everything, stripping away her pride, begging for salvation. She expected Jasmine to lecture her, or maybe to yell. But when Jasmine finally spoke, her voice was void of anger. It was void of pity. It was simply indifferent. "That sounds like a terrible situation," Bianca, Jasmine said. "It sounds like you are finally learning what things cost." "Jasmine, please," Bianca wailed. "He is a monster. He is the monster you chose," Jasmine replied. "You and Mom and Dad chose him over me every single day for years. You chose his lies over my truth. You laughed when he mocked me. You spent my money to buy his affection. Now you have him. Enjoy him." "No, Jasmine," no, Bianca screamed. "Do not do this. I am your sister." The line crackled. "By the way," Jasmine said softly, "I never got the chance to say it before you left. Happy belated birthday to me." Click. The dial tone hummed in Bianca's ear, a monotonous drone that signaled the end of the world as she knew it. She stood there in the dirty lobby of a Roman hostel, clutching a dead phone, realizing that for the first time in her life, the safety net was not just gone. It had been pulled away by the very hands she had bitten for so long. She slid down to the floor, hugging her knees to her chest, and wept, not for her lost luxury, but for the sister she had finally completely lost. The flight back from Rome was not the champagne-fueled dream my sister had posted about on Instagram. It was a 13-hour nightmare in the middle row of economy class on a government-issued emergency loan. The U.S. Embassy had eventually taken pity on the weeping couple in the lobby, granting them a repatriation loan that would need to be repaid with interest. Bianca sat squeezed between a backpacking student who smelled of damp wool and Julian, who spent the entire flight staring blankly at the seat back in front of him. They wore the same clothes they had been wearing for 3 days. Bianca's white tracksuit was stained with coffee and grime, and her hair was matted against her head. There were no hot towels, there was no legroom. There was only the humiliation of knowing they were returning as failures. When they finally landed in Atlanta, they did not have a driver waiting. They had to take the public train and then an Uber X, which Julian paid for by begging the driver to take a Venmo transfer that he hoped would clear later. They arrived at the Buckhead mansion just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn that was already starting to look thirsty in the heat. The house was dark, not the cozy dimness of evening mood lighting, but the absolute suffocating blackness of a tomb. They dragged their suitcases up the driveway, the wheels clattering loudly on the stone. Julian tried the front door code. The keypad remained dark. The electronic lock was dead. "We are locked out," Bianca whimpered, dropping her bag. Desmond opened the door from the inside a moment later, holding a flickering beeswax candle. He looked 10 years older than he had 3 days ago. His shirt was unbuttoned to his chest, and sweat was glistening on his forehead. The air conditioning had been off for 72 hours in the Georgia summer. The inside of the house felt like a sauna. "Get inside," Desmond hissed, pulling them into the foyer. "Do not let the neighbors see you looking like that." They shuffled into the living room. My mother Loretta was sitting on the velvet sofa fanning herself with a piece of junk mail. She looked at Bianca and Julian not with maternal warmth but with accusation. "You two smell terrible," Loretta said. "We have been sleeping in a hostel, Mom." Bianca shot back, her voice raspy from crying. "We haven't showered in 3 days. We have been eating bread crusts while you guys sat here in the dark." "Do not take that tone with me," young lady, Loretta snapped. "We are victims here too. Your father has been trying to find a lawyer, but without the internet or phone service, we are cut off from the world. We are trapped in this oven." "Where is she?" Julian asked. His voice was low and dangerous. "Where is Jasmine?" "We do not know," Desmond said, pacing the room. "We went to her old apartment. She is gone. She vanished." "She did not vanish," Julian said. "She is watching. She is enjoying this." Just then, a sound cut through the heavy silence of the house. It was the distinct, throaty purr of a high-performance engine coming up the long driveway. It wasn't the rattle of my Toyota. It was the aggressive mechanical growl of a vintage Porsche 911 Turbo. Headlights swept across the front window, blindingly bright, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the stagnant air. "Who is that?" my mother asked, standing up. "Is it the police?" The engine cut. A car door slammed with a solid, expensive thud. The front door swung open. I stepped into the foyer. I was wearing a tailored navy jumpsuit that cost more than Julian's wedding suit. My hair was blown out perfectly, and I wore stilettos that clicked sharply on the marble floor. I looked fresh, cool, and utterly untouched by the chaos that was consuming them. For a moment, they just stared at me. The contrast was brutal. They were sweaty, dirty, and broken. I was the image of the success they had always pretended to have. "Jasmine," my mother breathed. I did not say hello. I did not ask how their trip was. I walked past them into the living room, the scent of my expensive perfume cutting through the smell of their body odor and stale air. I carried a thick manila folder in my hand. I dropped it onto the glass coffee table. It landed with a heavy slap that echoed in the silence. "We need to talk," I said. My voice was calm, level, and authoritative. The spell broke. "You little witch," my father roared. He lunged toward me, his face purple with rage. "How dare you? How dare you cut the power? How dare you embarrass us like this? Turn it back on right now or you will what?" "Dad," I interrupted him, not stepping back an inch. "You will cut off my allowance. You will write me out of the will." "Oh, wait. You do not have an allowance to give, and the will is worth less than the paper it is written on." "You stole our money," Julian shouted, stepping forward. Fists clenched. "That trust fund belongs to the family. You embezzled it. I will have you arrested." I laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. "Embezzled," I repeated. I pointed at the folder on the table. "Open it, Julian." He stared at me, breathing heavily. "Open it," I commanded. He reached down and flipped the folder open. He held the documents up to the candlelight, squinting to read them. "These are the incorporation papers for the Desmond Trust," I said. "Look at the signature line for the grantor. Look at the source of funds." Julian's eyes scanned the page. His face went pale beneath the grime. It says the initial capital was deposited by Jasmine Desmond," he whispered. "That is right," I said. "5 years ago, when Dad bankrupted this family, I bought the debt. Every dollar in that account was earned by me. Every steak you ate, every flight you took, every suit you are wearing. I paid for it. I did not manage your money, Julian. I allowed you to live off mine." My mother gasped, covering her mouth. "No, that is not true. Your grandfather left us millions." "Grandfather left you a house with 3 mortgages and a gambling addiction, Mom," I said, looking at her. "I paid off the mortgages, I kept the lights on. And in return, you treated me like a servant. You forgot my birthday, you mocked my job, and you handed my hard-earned money to this fraud of a husband." I gestured to Julian. "Tell them, Julian," I said. "Tell them about your startup." He looked down at the floor. "Tell them," I shouted, my voice finally rising. "He has no money, Bianca," I said, turning to my sister. "He has been draining the trust to pay his gambling debts. I saw the transaction history: online poker, sports betting, escorts in Vegas." Bianca let out a strangled cry. "Escorts. It is all in the file," I said. "The bank statements do not lie." My father was shaking. He looked from the file to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and fury. He could not handle the truth. He could not handle that the daughter he despised was the only reason he wasn't living under a bridge. His ego was fracturing, and violence was his only defense. "You ungrateful lion," he snarled. He raised his hand high, ready to strike me across the face. It was a reflex he had used when I was a child to keep me in line. I did not flinch. I did not cower. I looked him dead in the eye. "Do not even think about it, Desmond." He froze, his hand trembling in the air. "My lawyer is sitting in the car outside," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream. "And right behind him is a police cruiser. I have already filed a report for financial fraud against Julian, and I have a restraining order drafted for all of you." I took a step closer to him, daring him. "You touch me and you will spend the rest of your life in a cell. And unlike this house, that cell will not have air conditioning either." My father's hand hovered for a second longer. Then slowly, painfully, he lowered it. He collapsed onto the sofa, putting his head in his hands. The defeat was total. I looked around the room. At my mother, weeping silently. At Bianca, staring at her husband with horror. At Julian, looking like a cornered rat. "Sit down," I ordered. "We are going to go through this file page by page, and when I am done, you are going to understand exactly what happens next." I sat down in the velvet wingback chair that my mother usually reserved for her most important guests. In the flickering candlelight of the dark living room, I opened the manila folder with the precision of a surgeon preparing to operate. My family stood around me, sweating in the stagnant heat, waiting for the verdict. I was no longer their daughter or their sister. I was the senior actuary, and they were the liabilities I was about to write off. I pulled out the first document. It was a spreadsheet, color-coded and itemized. I slid it across the glass coffee table toward Bianca. "You wanted to know where the money went?" I said, my voice cutting through the humid air. "You thought Julian was investing in algorithms. You thought he was building a tech empire. Look at column B." Bianca picked up the paper. Her hands were trembling so badly the paper shook. She squinted in the dim light. "What is this?" she whispered. "Sapphire Club. Vegas Five. IP. High Rollers Online. Read the dates, Bianca," I commanded. "Read the dates and the amounts." She ran her finger down the page. May 12th. $3,000. Sapphire Club. June 4th. $5,000. Poker Stars. I watched Julian. He was shrinking against the mantelpiece, his face a mask of terror. He knew exactly what was on that page. "That is business entertainment," he stammered, his voice high and thin. "You have to wine and dine clients, Jasmine. You would not understand. You are just a bean counter." I ignored him. I pulled out the second sheet. It was a credit card authorization form. "And this," I said, pointing to a highlighted section. "This is a charge for 2 nights at the Ritz-Carlton in Buckhead. Dated 3 weeks ago." Bianca looked up, confusion warring with horror in her eyes. "But Julian was in San Francisco 3 weeks ago. He said he was meeting investors. He was 10 miles away, Bianca," I said. "And he was not alone. The room service bill lists champagne and oysters for 2. And unless Julian suddenly developed an appetite for floral arrangements, he also spent $400 on roses that you certainly never received." Bianca dropped the paper as if it burned her. She turned to her husband. Her face was not sad anymore. It was twisted in disgust. "You cheated on me," she screamed. "You spent my sister money to cheat on me." Julian stepped forward, his hands raised in surrender. "Baby, listen to me. She is manipulating the data. It is a misunderstanding." I did not let him finish. I was just getting started. "The financial infidelity is bad enough," I said, turning my gaze to my parents. "But the personal betrayal runs deeper. You two have spent years worshipping this man. You compared me to him. You told me I should be more like him, more charismatic, more successful." I pulled out my smartphone and placed it on the table. "I have a security system in this house," I said. "You know that because I pay the bill for it. But what you did not know is that the cameras in the living room record audio." I tapped the screen. A recording began to play. The quality was crisp and clear. It was Julian's voice recorded 2 months prior right here in this room. The audio filled the silence. "I am telling you, baby," Julian's voice sneered. "Your parents are the biggest idiots I have ever met. They actually believe the tech mogul act. Your dad is a pompous windbag who thinks he is still a big shot, and your mom is just desperate to look rich. They are pathetic, really. Once we get the deed to the lake house, we are putting them in a home. I cannot stand listening to their stories anymore." I paused the recording. The silence that followed was heavier than the heat. My father, Desmond, looked like he had been punched in the gut. He stared at Julian, his mouth slightly open, his eyes wide with disbelief. The son-in-law, he had bragged about the man he had given his Rolex to, had been laughing at him the entire time. "You said that," my father whispered. "You called me a windbag." Julian shook his head frantically. "That is edited. That is AI generated. Jasmine is faking it." I stood up, then towering over them in my heels. "I do not fake things, Julian. I calculate them. And I calculated that you would eventually slip up." I reached into the folder for the final document. "The killing blow. You threatened to kick me out of this house earlier." "Dad," I said, holding the thick document with the blue cover. "You told me to turn the power back on or leave." I tossed the document onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud. "Read the deed." My father looked down. He did not need to pick it up. He recognized the blue cover. It was the transfer document from the bankruptcy proceedings. Property address 402 Highland Drive. Owner of record Jasmine Desmond. "This house does not belong to you," I said, my voice cold and hard. "It belongs to me. Every brick, every beam, every light bulb you are currently sweating without. I bought it from the bank 5 years ago to keep you from being evicted. I let you live here rent-free. I let you play pretend." I looked at my mother. She was swaying slightly, her face ashen in the candlelight. You treated the owner of your home like an unwanted guest, I said. You catered to a con artist and spat on the person who put the roof over your head. My mother let out a low moan. Her hand clutched her chest. The heat, the shock, the sudden destruction of her entire worldview was too much. Her eyes rolled back and her knees buckled. Loretta, my father, cried out, catching her just before she hit the floor. He lowered her onto the sofa, fanning her face frantically. "She is fainting!" Desmond yelled. "Jasmine, do something! Call 911!" I looked at them unmoved. "I will call the paramedics," I said. "But right after that, I am calling the police." At the mention of police, Julian's facade shattered completely. The arrogance vanished. The excuses evaporated. He realized there was no way out. The evidence was on the table. The money was gone. His wife hated him. His in-laws knew the truth. And I held the keys to his freedom. He did something I never thought I would see. He dropped to his knees. He crawled across the Persian rug, disregarding his ruined suit, disregarding his pride. He crawled until he was at my feet. "Jasmine," he sobbed, reaching for the hem of my pants. "Jasmine, please, do not call the cops. I will do anything. I will pay it back. Just give me time. I cannot go to jail. Please. We are family." I looked down at him, at the man who had called me a calculator, at the man who had mocked my loneliness, at the man who had worn my father watch while flying first class. "Get your hands off me," I said, stepping back. I looked at Bianca, who was staring at her husband groveling on the floor. I looked at my father, who was weeping over my unconscious mother. "This," I said quietly, "is exactly what you bought with my money." I turned and walked toward the door, where the blue lights of the police cruiser were already flashing through the front window, silent and waiting. The blue lights flashing against the living room walls were no longer a threat from the outside world. They were my invitation. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. The humid Georgia night air rushed in, followed immediately by two uniformed officers and a man in a plain gray suit who I had been speaking with for the past 48 hours. "Officer Davis, this is the man," I said, pointing a steady finger at the figure groveling on my Persian rug. "Julian Vance." Julian scrambled backward on his hands and knees, his eyes darting between me and the police like a trapped animal. "What is this?" he stammered, trying to stand up, but stumbling. "Jasmine, you cannot be serious. This is a family dispute. You cannot arrest me for a family dispute." The detective in the gray suit stepped forward. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "Mr. Vance, you are under arrest for 3 counts of felony wire fraud, 2 counts of identity theft, and first-degree forgery. We have digital forensic evidence linking your IP address to unauthorized loan applications made in the name of Ms. Jasmine Desmond." Julian's face turned a sickly shade of gray. "But I have permission," he shouted, pointing at my parents. "Ask them. They said I could use the money. They are her parents. They gave me permission." My father looked away, unable to meet Julian's eyes. My mother was still weeping softly on the sofa. They knew that their permission meant nothing when the name on the account was mine. "I did not give you permission, Julian," I said, my voice cutting through his panic. "And I certainly did not give you permission to practice my signature on those promissory notes you sent to the bank last week. You thought because I was quiet, I was not paying attention. But I saw the inquiries on my credit report. I saw the digital footprints." The officers moved in. The sound of metal handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud and final in the silent house. Julian began to struggle, thrashing against the officer's grip. "Bianca," he screamed. "Bianca, do something. Tell them. Tell them we are partners. Get me a lawyer." Bianca stood frozen by the fireplace. She looked at her husband, the man who had cheated on her, the man who had gambled away her future, and she did not move. She did not speak. She just watched as they dragged him toward the door, his expensive Italian loafers scraping uselessly against the floor he had vowed to kick my parents out of. As they shoved him into the back of the cruiser, Julian's screaming turned to pleading, and then finally to silence as the door slammed shut. I closed the front door and locked it. I turned back to the room. My parents were huddled together on the sofa, looking small and terrified. Bianca was standing alone, shivering despite the heat. "Now for the rest of you," I said, walking back to the coffee table. I picked up the last document from my folder. It was not a lawsuit. It was a lease agreement. I walked over to my father. I held the paper out to him. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "It is a residential lease agreement," I explained calmly. "Since you are currently occupying my property without a contract, I am formalizing our arrangement." My mother looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "You are making us pay rent?" she asked in disbelief. "In our own home?" "In my home," I corrected her. "And yes, the rent is set at fair market value for a 6-bedroom estate in Buckhead. It is $6,000 a month plus utilities." "6,000?" my father gasped. "We cannot afford that, Jasmine. You know we live on a fixed income. The bankruptcy took almost everything." "Then maybe you should not have spent 5 years pretending you were millionaires," I said. "But do not worry. I am not a monster. I will give you the first month free to get your affairs in order. You can sell the Mercedes. You can sell the country club membership. You can sell the art on the walls. That should cover the rent for a year." I pulled a pen from my pocket and placed it on top of the lease. "There is one more condition," I added, pointing to clause 14 at the bottom of the page. My father squinted to read it. "The tenants agree that no financial assistance, housing, or support of any kind shall be provided to Bianca Vance or any of her affiliates within the premises. Violation of this clause will result in immediate eviction with no grace period." Bianca's head snapped up. What she cried out. "You are banning me from seeing my parents." "I am not banning you from seeing them," I said. "I am banning them from funding you. If you want to come over for dinner, that is fine. But you cannot live here. You cannot do laundry here. And if I find out Dad gave you a single dollar for gas, they are out on the street." "Jasmine, please," Bianca sobbed, running toward me. She reached out to grab my arm, but I stepped back out of reach. "I have nowhere to go," Bianca wailed. "Julian is gone. The accounts are frozen. I have no job. I have no money. You cannot leave me on the street. I am your sister." "You are a 26-year-old woman," I said, looking at her with pity but no yielding. "You have a college degree that you never used. You have 2 arms and 2 legs. You are perfectly capable of working." "But I do not know how to do anything," she cried, her face crumpling. "I was supposed to go to Rome. I was supposed to be an influencer." "Then influence someone to hire you," I said. My father looked at the lease and then at Bianca. He looked at the luxury walls around him, the home he was terrified of losing. He looked at my mother, who was nodding weakly, signaling him to sign. They were survivors, and right now surviving meant sacrificing the golden child. "I am sorry, Bianca," my father whispered. He picked up the pen. "No. Daddy, do not sign it," Bianca screamed, falling to her knees. "Do not let her do this." My father signed his name with a shaking hand. I took the paper back and checked the signature. It was valid. "You have 30 days to pay the first utility bill," I told my parents. "If the lights go out again, they stay out." I picked up my folder and walked toward the door. Bianca was still on the floor, weeping, reaching out for me one last time. "Jasmine, help me," she begged. "I do not know how to survive." I stopped and looked back at her, the sister who had laughed when I paid the bills, the sister who had thrown her laundry at me. "You will figure it out," I said. I did. I walked out into the night air. The police cruiser was gone, taking Julian to his new reality. I got into my Porsche and started the engine. As I pulled away, I saw Bianca standing in the window, watching me leave her silhouette, small and dark, against the candlelight of the house she used to rule. I did not feel guilt. I felt the immense relief of a balance sheet that had finally been corrected. The days following Julian's arrest were a blur of legal notices and harsh realities for my sister. While my parents were busy selling their antique furniture to pay the first month rent, Bianca was discovering that marriage was not just a union of hearts, but a binding contract of debts. It turned out that in her desperation to be the perfect trophy wife, she had co-signed almost every loan Julian had taken out. The foreclosure notices on properties that did not exist, and the demand letters for cars that had already been repossessed were now addressed to her. She came to my office 3 days after the police raid. She did not have an appointment, but the receptionist let her in, probably because she looked like she was about to faint. She was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, the designer labels gone sold to a consignment shop, to pay for a lawyer who had told her she had no case. "Jasmine," she said, standing in the doorway of my corner office. Her voice was small, stripped of the entitlement that had defined it for 26 years. "I have $70,000 in debt. They are going to garnish my wages, but I do not have any wages. I do not have a job. I do not have anything." I looked up from my desk. I did not offer her a seat. "Then you need to get a job." "Bianca," I said simply. "I tried," she cried. "I applied at the boutiques. I applied at the galleries. No one is hiring. And even if they were, it is not enough to pay the minimum payments. I need help, Jazz. Just a loan. I will pay you back, I swear." I closed my laptop and stood up, walking over to the window that looked out over the sprawling Atlanta skyline. "I am not giving you money," I said. "I am done funding your mistakes. But I will give you an opportunity." Bianca's eyes lit up. A glimmer of the old hope returned. "You mean, like a position here in marketing or events?" "I could be good at events." I turned to face her. My expression remained impassive. "Not here," I said. "But I am a majority shareholder in a commercial real estate holding company. We manage several Class A office buildings downtown, including the one across the street." I pointed to the gleaming glass tower opposite us. "We are currently looking to fill a vacancy on the maintenance team," I continued. "It is the night shift. It pays $18 an hour with benefits. And since I know the owner, I can guarantee you the interview." Bianca's jaw dropped. "Maintenance," she whispered. "You mean like a janitor?" "I mean a sanitation specialist," I corrected her. "You will be cleaning floors, emptying trash bins, and ensuring the restrooms are stocked. It is honest work, Bianca, the kind of work that pays bills." "You cannot be serious," she stammered, her face flushing red. "I am a Desmond. I cannot scrub toilets. What if people see me?" "Then do not take the job." I shrugged, returning to my desk. "But the debt collectors do not care about your last name. And neither does the landlord of the studio apartment you are trying to rent." She stood there for a long moment, struggling with the weight of her pride versus the weight of her survival. She looked at me, waiting for me to crack, waiting for me to say it was a joke and hand her a check. I picked up my pen and started writing on a notepad, ignoring her. "Fine," she whispered. Her voice broke. "I will take it." The next week was a lesson in humility that no textbook could ever teach. Bianca traded her silk blouses for a gray polyester uniform that was 2 sizes too big. She traded her manicured nails for rubber gloves. She traded her nights of champagne and parties for nights of ammonia and floor wax. I did not visit her. I did not check on her. I let the reality of labor settle into her bones. One evening, about 2 weeks later, I had a late meeting with the board of directors in that very building. I walked into the lobby at 7 p.m., wearing a tailored white suit, carrying my briefcase flanked by 2 senior partners. The lobby was quiet, the day staff having gone home, leaving the night crew to erase the mess of the corporate world. I heard the rhythmic swish of a mop before I saw her. Bianca was over by the elevators, pushing a heavy yellow bucket. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and there was a streak of grime on her cheek. She looked exhausted. Her shoulders were slumped, and she was putting her entire body weight into scrubbing a stubborn scuff mark on the marble floor. She stopped when she heard our footsteps. She looked up. For a second time, froze. She saw me. She saw the way the partners deferred to me, the way I commanded the space, the way I looked in a suit that she used to tell me was too boring for a woman of my age. And I saw her. I saw the sister who had once ordered me to fetch her dry cleaning, now cleaning up after strangers. I saw the shame flare in her eyes. She gripped the mop handle tighter, looking like she wanted to disappear into the floor she was polishing. One of the partners noticed her staring. "Is there a problem, miss?" he asked a bit sharply. Bianca opened her mouth. I braced myself. I expected her to scream. I expected her to run over and beg. I expected her to make a scene and claim she was my sister. But she didn't. She looked at me. And in that look I saw something shift. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hatred. It was recognition. For the first time she saw the distance between us not as bad luck, but as the result of choices. She realized that while she was playing dress-up, I was building the building she was standing in. "No, sir," Bianca said, softly lowering her head. "No problem. Just missed a spot." She turned back to her bucket and dipped the mop into the gray water. I felt a small, tight knot in my chest loosen. "Good evening," I said to her as I walked past toward the elevators. "Good evening, ma'am," she replied without looking up. As the elevator doors closed, I watched her through the gap. She was scrubbing with a rhythm now, a determination I had never seen before. She was not doing it for an audience. She was not doing it for a photo. She was doing it because she had to. That night when I got home, I received a text message. It was from a number I did not recognize, but I knew who it was. It was a photo, a picture of a paycheck stub. It was for $700. Underneath it, she had written just one sentence. My feet hurt, but I paid the electric bill myself. I did not reply. I did not need to. But I sat there in my penthouse looking at that small, blurry photo of a minimum wage check, and I felt a strange sense of pride. Not the pride my parents felt when she married a fraud, but the pride of seeing someone finally wake up from a coma. Bianca was still miles away from redemption. She had years of debt to pay off, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't looking for a handout. She was holding a mop. And that was a start. 6 months is a long time in the financial world. It is enough time for a market to crash, and it is enough time for a new empire to rise from the ashes. In Atlanta, the humid summer had given way to a crisp, cool autumn, and the landscape of my life had changed just as drastically. Julian was currently residing in a state correctional facility 2 hours south of the city. The only stripes he wore now were on his orange jumpsuit, and his networking skills were being used to trade cigarettes rather than venture capital. I heard through the grapevine that he had tried to appeal his sentence, but with the mountain of forensic accounting evidence I had provided, his lawyer had advised him to stay quiet and serve his time. My parents were still in the mansion, but they were ghosts in their own home. They lived in fear of the first of the month. Every time rent was due, the check arrived on my desk 3 days early. They had sold the Mercedes and replaced it with a used Honda. They had canceled the country club membership, telling their friends they were downsizing for environmental reasons to save face. They stopped hosting parties. They stopped bragging. When they saw me on the rare occasions I stopped by to inspect the property, they did not scold me or critique my hair. They looked at me with a mixture of awe and terror. They realized that the quiet girl they had ignored was the only thing standing between them and homelessness. As for me, I had stopped hiding. I leveraged the liquidity from the trust to buy a distressed commercial portfolio in Midtown. I renovated the buildings and leased them to tech startups. The local business journal ran a profile on me last week with the headline, "The Silent Shark of Atlanta." I framed it and hung it in my office not for vanity, but as a reminder of what happens when you stop apologizing for your intelligence. But the biggest change wasn't in my bank account. It was sitting across from me at dinner. Andre was the lead prosecutor who had helped put Julian away. We had started talking over case files and realized we had more in common than just a desire for justice. Andre was brilliant, kind, and successful in his own right. He did not need my money, he did not need my status, he just wanted to hear about my day. On the night of my 31st birthday, Andre rented out the rooftop of the very hotel where Julian had tried to cheat on Bianca. But this time, there were no lies. There were 50 of my closest friends, colleagues, and business partners. The air was filled with genuine laughter and jazz music. Bianca was there too. She had taken the night off from her cleaning job. She stood by the railing looking out at the city wearing a simple dress she had bought with her own paycheck. She looked tired, but she looked real. She came over to me and handed me a small box. Inside was a silver bracelet. It wasn't expensive, but it was the first gift she had ever bought me with money she had actually earned. "Happy birthday, Jazz," she said quietly. "Thank you, Bianca," I said, and I meant it. Then Andre brought out the cake. It was not a generic sheet cake. It was a 3-tier masterpiece decorated in gold and navy. Written in elegant icing across the bottom were the words, "To the Queen of Her Own Castle." I blew out the candles, and for the first time in my life, I did not need to make a wish. I already had everything I wanted. A few weeks later, the 12-month lease on the Buckhead mansion officially expired. I had made a decision. I was not going to renew it. The house was too big for 2 aging people, and frankly, it held too many bad memories. I listed the property and it sold in 3 days for asking price. I went to the house one last time to oversee the movers. The rooms were echoing and empty. The outlines of pictures remained on the walls like shadows of a past life. My parents were sitting on the last remaining sofa, looking small and defeated. I walked over to them and handed them a set of keys. "These are for a condo in Sandy Springs," I said. "It is 2 bedrooms. It is nice. It is secure. And the rent is paid for the next 6 months. After that, you are on your own." My mother Loretta took the keys. Her hands were shaking. She looked around the grand living room, where she had held so many parties, where she had tried so hard to impress people who did not care about her. "Jasmine," she said, her voice cracking, "I am sorry. I know I have said it before, but I am truly sorry. I miss you. I miss us. Can we not just start over? Can we not go back to how things were before the money got in the way?" I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had forgotten my 30th birthday. The woman who had told me to be more like the sister who was now mopping floors. I felt a pang of sadness, but it was a distant feeling, like looking at an old photograph of a stranger. "No, Mom," I said gently. "We cannot go back. You cannot erase 30 years of neglect with 6 months of regret." "But we can fix it," she pleaded, reaching for my hand. "We can deposit more love into the relationship. We can build it up again." I pulled my hand away slowly. "That is the problem, Mom," I said. "You think relationships are transactions. You think you can deposit love only when you need to make a withdrawal. But the account is closed. I withdrew from this relationship the day you chose a con man over your daughter," I said firmly. "I will make sure you are safe. I will make sure you have a roof over your head because that is the decent thing to do. But I am not your daughter anymore. I am just your landlord." I turned and walked out the front door. I walked past the spot where Julian had been arrested. I walked past the driveway where my dented Toyota used to sit. I climbed into my Porsche, and Andre was waiting in the passenger seat. He smiled and took my hand. I drove away without looking back. I looked directly into the camera lens, breaking the fourth wall for the first time. They say blood is thicker than water, but sometimes blood is just the currency that toxic people use to buy your silence. My family thought I was an inexhaustible resource. They thought my love and my bank account had no bottom. They were wrong. If you are watching this and you feel like the ATM for your family, if you feel like your worth is measured only by what you can provide, if you are waiting for a thank you that never comes, stop. You cannot buy respect, you cannot finance love, and you certainly cannot save people who are determined to drown. Find your own button. Find your own limit, and do not be afraid to hit withdraw. I am Jasmine Desmond, and this is my new beginning. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to know that it is okay to walk away. It is okay to choose yourself, and it is okay to close the account. Thank you for watching.